Everybody. I am Michael Munson with Forge. I am really thrilled that you're all here today. Welcome to the first of our report back sessions. We will probably have more along the way. So you are in the right place if you're coming to hear about the Trans Survivor Toolkit and the listening session report back. So I will be leading part of it. Again, Michael Munson and Emil Rudisau will also be leading another section of it. And we're really happy that you're all here with us today. So our agenda is really simple. We're going to have some kind of welcome intros, housekeeping. We'll talk about the project overview. And we're having a little slide thing problem as we are sharing our controls. We'll talk about the project's overview. We'll talk about the process of how we conducted listening sessions and some of the kind of the nitty-gritty of how things worked. We'll talk about the findings, which is probably what you're here to listen to and hear about. And then we'll talk about what some of our next steps are moving forward. And Emil, I'm going to let you advance the slides since, yeah, excellent. Thank you. So whenever you're ready, it's great. So a couple of housekeeping items. Most of us are very familiar with Zoom, so this will be a repeat for most folks. But if we look at the first housekeeping item, we're going to be using Poll Everywhere for a couple of interactions today. So you can either use your phone or a desktop web browser. Either one will work fine. Everybody has been able to figure it out in some way at somehow time before. And if you're not able to figure that out, we welcome your answers in the chat box, however you are able to participate the best. So most folks know about the chat function. Many of you have found it. So yay for finding the chat feature. If folks want to say where you're from, that would be cool, just so that we can all practice finding the chat. And if you'd like to ask questions that are either more formal or you'd like to ask them anonymously, we encourage you to use the Q&A function because you can ask a question without any name attribution. A couple of points of access. You might be seeing already the closed captions. If you would like to use closed captions, you can click on the CC and then select either show subtitles, which will be that row below the speakers and the PowerPoints, or choose full transcript, which will generally show up along the side. Most of you should be seeing MJ, who's ASL interpreting right now, and we will try to make sure that folks are pinned so that you can always see the interpreter. Next slide, please. The other point of access that most people know about, but just as a quick reminder for folks, there's a little slider bar between the people and the PowerPoint slides. So if you want to see the slides bigger and the people smaller, you can move it over to the right or the other way around. So whatever is best for you. And you can always change your view up at the top to choose gallery or speaker only. So those are a couple of the quick access things. And we want to remind folks to take care of yourselves. This is not likely going to be a trauma-heavy session, but we know that sometimes things can strike people in different ways. So please take care of yourself. We're recording, and it will be up on the web in another day or two after we make a little bit of edits to it. So know that you can come back and watch it later this week. Know that you can step away for a bathroom break or a water break or an outside fresh air break, whatever it is that you need to do. Let me share a little bit about who Forge is before we dive more deeply into the content for today. Forge is a 29-year-old trans anti-violence organization. We have been around for a long time, given 29 years. We do work across the country. A little tiny bit of work we do in Wisconsin, that's central to Wisconsin, but that's mostly some leftovers from our early days. We have staff that's across the country as well as the work that we do across the country. We predominantly do training and technical assistance, so we mostly work with providers, and lots of different kinds of victim service and other allied professionals is included in that provider base. And we do some work directly with trans and non-binary community members and survivors. Under the work that we do, we try to be trauma-informed and empowerment-based. And those two principles are always things that we need to constantly keep up to date with, remind ourselves of. And we care about both of these things, both when we're working with providers and when we're working with survivors. And with both of those things, we always want to be culturally responsive. So we really care to make sure that we're not treating one group of trans folks like another group of trans folks, or one type of provider like another. We want to be responsive to that community or that provider or that profession when we're doing the work with folks. So we wanted to do a couple of quick introductions, and it's probably just going to be me and Emil saying hello. But again, I'm Michael Munson, Forge's executive director. Just for a quick visual description, I have a black shirt on today with a white undershirt, purple checkered scarf, glasses, short hair, and behind me are 2 handkerchiefs that say trans joy on them. Emil, do you want to say hi?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Emil Rudisell. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a project coordinator with Forge. I'm a white genderqueer person with blondish hair long on one side and piled on my head, and some facial hair. Behind me is a yellow and blue kind of diagonal painted wall with some framed pictures.
Cool. And other folks that are on staff that have been part of this project are Lori Cook-Daniels, our policy and program director, and Caleb Weinhart, who is, I forget what Caleb's title is because Caleb does everything. So Caleb is the everything title. So we really want to hear your thoughts and questions along the way, as well as us sharing with you. So please do feel free to use the chat, use it actively, use the Q&A feature actively, and please participate in the poll everywhere questions if and as you can. We really want to, again, have this be as much of a dialogue as possible, even though we're in this webinar format. So let's do our first poll everywhere question. So the first question that we want to ask you is, what role brings you here today? So if you're texting, you can just enter the letter or letters that are appropriate for you. So if you're a survivor, which is A, B, a trans or non-binary community member, C, a service provider, D, participated in a listening session, or E, another role. You can answer more than one of those topics. So Emil, if you want to move to the next one, we should be able to start seeing people, and it gives them the instructions as well. So if folks want to start entering, great. In the chat is great. Perfect. Thank you for answering in the chat. And it's looking like this is not working like it's supposed to. You know, there's always something that doesn't work quite right. So if folks want to answer in the chat, Camille, you want to go back to the other slide that shows the questions? Thank you. So let's do this in the chat. We're going to be flexible. So what role brings you here today? Survivor, trans non-binary community member, service provider, participated in a listening session, or other roles. So I'm seeing a bunch of B's and C's, a couple of E's, some D's. Excellent. Excellent. So mostly B's and C's, which is cool. And I definitely am seeing some folks that have participated in the listening session. So thank you for the extra of being here again. Great. Excellent. Thank you for that feedback. That's really useful for us to see who's here and tailor a little bit of what we talk about in that way. So we wanted to do several thank yous, and the first one is to our funder, OVC, the Office for Victims of Crime. It has been amazingly wonderful in funding us for this 3-year project of creating the toolkit. And what we say and do here today doesn't necessarily reflect the Department of Justice. So these are our Forge's work, and you know the drill. So, but we are very, very grateful for their funding and for their support and for caring about trans folks enough to make this a fundable project for us to work on. And we do have our program manager that is here with us. So Stacy, if you want to come on and say hello to people, that would be super, like super, super, super nice.
Sure. Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Stacy Phillips, and I'm a program manager with the Office for Victims of Crime. I just want to take a second, if you don't know what the Office for Victims of Crime are, just to tell you a little bit about us. So our mission is that we are committed to enhancing the nation's capacity to assist crime victims and to providing leadership and changing attitudes policies and practices to promote justice and healing for all victims of crime. And so we are funded through the Victims of Crime Act, through VOCA is what we call it, and through the Crime Victims Fund. And so the fund is non-taxpayer dollars that's paid through federal offender restitution, as well as through donations and bequests. But we support a broad variety of programs that really focus on helping victims in the immediate aftermath of crime, and then continue to support them as they rebuild their lives. And so super excited to be here. I wanted to say, thank you so much to Michael and Emil and their team at Forge. This project is so important, especially now. It's been important for a long time, but we stand with you. And we feel with you and feel just everything that you guys are going through. And this project and what you've done to be able to showcase the voice of the trans community. And we are so excited that you're going to be creating this toolkit, the one that was done back in 2014, which I think you did. And it's obviously so important to be able to update that and to change with the changing times. And so we just want to say thank you to your team. Thank you to all of you that have participated in these listening sessions. I know that Emil and Michael and their team have been working diligently over the last several months doing these listening sessions and really getting all of the information from you and your voice. And I'm so excited that they're going to be able to share this, not just with us at OVC, but all of you. And so thank you so much. What the outcome of this is going to be will be transformational for your community and so important. So thank you to all of you. And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Stacy. As all of you who are participating can hear, Stacy is fantastic, and we love our relationship of ease and just how much she values our work and we value her work. And so it's really lovely to have a program manager that we can easily communicate with. So thank you for making our work easier and hopefully your work easier too. So let me tell you a little bit of background about the toolkit. Like Stacy mentioned, we created the first of these toolkits in 2014. So it feels like forever ago. When I look at this, I oftentimes tell people I'm a little embarrassed, but more so than embarrassed, it's just old. It's just out of date for where we are in 10 years, which says that there's a lot of stuff that's happened in 10 years, which is phenomenal. That trans communities have really evolved very quickly, and the needs of trans communities have evolved and changed. The toolkit that we developed in 2014 was specific to trans victims of sexual assault. What we're going to be doing now is going to be much broader and bigger than that. The toolkit was also set up to look at some specific types of victim service providers. So it was created for healthcare providers, emergency medical professionals, law enforcement, advocates, therapists, and support group facilitators. So that was a really narrow focus with a really narrow set of providers that we were trying to create resources for. And Emil, if you want to move to the next slide, this toolkit is going to be much bigger than that. So we're going to look beyond sexual assault to looking at multiple forms of crimes for multiple different kinds of providers. And so right now, what's on the screen is going to look really, really simple for a 3-year project. But we've just ended year 1. So in year 1, we have conducted listening sessions, we've done literature review, we've reviewed the old toolkit. We've met with our advisory team, which are fantastic, and I'll tell you a little bit more about in a few minutes. So that this first year has really been about gathering information, what comes into us that we can process and think about and figure out the best direction to go in. Year 2, which we're just starting, is about reporting back. So this is one of our report backs of being transparent with the folks that have contributed and with our greater community. And by community, I mean both trans communities and our providers and victim service providers. And then we're going to start to draft the toolkit. Forge is actually having a retreat. We're going to be putting lots of sticky notes up on the walls and really figuring out from the information that we have, how do we want to figure out what is best to focus on, both in terms of what types of crime and who the information will be most targeted or geared towards. And that may change as we start to develop the content. As we develop content, we will be working with our advisory team and some other expert reviewers to make sure that our content is relevant and accurate and appropriate. Make sure that OVC likes the direction that we're going with, as well as the providers that these are going to be for. And then year 3 is going to be actually kind of putting that into practice. So creating that online platform, making sure that we have access needs taken care of, that it's in more than one language, it's not just in English, that every video has ASL, every video has captions, all of those things that will make it a very accessible and complete as possible toolkit. And let's move on to the very messy slide. So I don't anticipate anybody will be able to read this. This is just a little bit of the flow chart that kind of captures what I just shared with you. So the slide before is kind of in years, and this is kind of in process. So we've reviewed content, we've listened to folks, we've listened to our advisory team, we've written some things to OVC to make sure that they're in alignment with what's happening, and now we're starting to create that toolkit and being really mindful of, again, those multiple different communities, multiple different kinds of providers. And then we'll move on after it's up and running and we've tested it to disseminating through social media and articles and conferences and meetings and every way that we can help get it out. And we're hoping that some of you will also help with that dissemination production when we get there, but it will be another year or so before we get to that point. So I've mentioned the advisory team a couple of times. They are really an essential part of our work. We've only met a couple of times, but we've had a couple of formal meetings, and then we've had a lot of one-on-one meetings with different people that are on our advisory team. So in addition to meetings, we are receiving shared resources from them, from their individual disciplines or their individual perspectives. We're getting to hear their individual perspectives, their unique perspectives, that we may not have the knowledge. That's why we want a team of folks that have different expertise than we have. We are counting on them to disseminate both the end product as well as they help disseminate to recruit listening session participants. They'll be reviewing our content, and they did co-facilitate some of the listening sessions. So, and there's going to be other duties as assigned. So, I mean, it's they're a wonderful group of folks, and we are just so grateful that they are part of this project with us. So a couple of kind of overview pieces of listening session and a couple of thank yous. We held 28 listening sessions. We were going to have 29, but we had 28. And that actually grew from our original proposal that we made to OVC, which I think had maybe 8 or 9. So we listened to what community needed, where we needed to follow those voices, both professionals and community members, and we created more listening sessions. We had a total of 150 participants, and we had 20 outside facilitators or co-facilitators. In addition to that, let me just go back for a second, Emil. In addition to that, we wanted people to be able to contribute to sharing their stories, sharing their information. So we do have some surveys that have been open so people could write in their content that they'd like to share, as well as we've done a couple of one-on-one conversations. And we do anticipate having some additional one-on-one conversations to make sure that we get some of those voices in that we might not have heard from already. Thanks, Emil. So, like I said, we had 20 outside facilitators. We are so incredibly grateful to them. And I'm actually going to list them off because I think it's important to make sure that names are heard from all of us or with all of us. So Alex Capitan, Amanda Gould, Angelita, whose last name I always mess up, so I'm not even going to try, but Angelita rocks. Annie Lakatos, Antonia Diaz, Ariana Lint, and I'm going to slow down for Hercules. You good? Okay. Brecken Winters, Carter Brown, Michael Woodward, Dee Dee Waters, Gia Miramontes, Chris Maddie, Lenny Hayes, Liam Esposito, Michael Crumrine, Trisha Fopp, Cheryl Wayland, and Yasmin Hunter. So they were really essential in making these listening sessions dynamic and really helping being part of the communities or part of the discipline of that listening session. So they were amazing. And if we move on to the next slide, I will spare folks from reading all of these, but as you can see, the slide is really full and probably not very readable, especially if you're on a tablet or a phone. We are really, really grateful to our advisory team and our consultants. And you can see there are many of them. So we really have tried to have different disciplines of all different kinds that contribute to making this project really successful and effective, and rich and diverse. Diverse is such a word that I don't like, but it's useful in this context. And we're also really grateful to the folks that have made these listening sessions more accessible. Tilde is our go-to for Spanish to English and English to Spanish interpreting. And they were helpful in translating the text for the SurveyMonkey, which Emil will share with you what we use SurveyMonkey for, our website content that's shared about the listening session, social media content, as well as translating 2 listening sessions, which were predominantly conducted in Spanish. So it was really useful for us to have that interpretation from Spanish to English, and for some other folks in ones that were going from English to Spanish. And we are thrilled that we have Bowtie Interpreting, who we love. They have a great team of folks that always provide just amazing, wonderful, culturally responsive interpreting for with ASL. So thank you for being here today and for being here throughout these sessions. And so my last slide before I turn things over to Emil is the thank you to the folks that participated in the listening sessions. Again, we had 150 people participate, which we're just absolutely thrilled with. We had hoped for between 5 and 8 people for each listening session. So we're in that target zone of what we had hoped for. We're just so incredibly grateful for the time that people spent, the energy, the emotional labor, the willingness to work on something together with us to make a better product and a better outcome. And we wanted to let you all know, because it's really important to our value system, that all of the community session participants were financially compensated. We trusted that most providers were compensated through their work and through their jobs, but we made sure that they got compensated in case if they weren't compensated through their work, because we know that people's time is really, really valuable. And we know that it's really hard to show up, and we want to share that appreciation in a tangible way. So thank you to everybody that participated in the sessions. Emil, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with this quote, which was from one of the community listening sessions. And a person in it said, "I'm having an unexpected reaction to these stories, this group. I feel an almost ecstatic high at being with a group of people who get this stuff, while at the same time feeling rage at how my human siblings are being treated. Holding the two in equipoise is like surfing, both intense feelings, dancing with each other. We are the floaties that will keep us all from drowning in the toxicity of our culture." And we wanted to start, talking about the findings and the process and all of that with just really holding on to this feeling that a major surprise to us and a bonus for us was how much folks got out of being there, and how much that space and that connection is really needed, and we're so glad that people stepped into it, and we were able to create those spaces. So a little bit more about kind of our process for holding the spaces and finding people to participate. As Michael mentioned, Forge really values being trauma-informed, culturally responsive, and empowerment-based. And so we looked at how can we ensure that these values run through the way that we recruit for and screen for the listening sessions, the way we hold the conversations, the way we follow up with people. So we looked at things like working to not re-traumatize people, having transparency, helping make sure folks, know what is going to happen in the listening sessions before they get there as much as we can, holding safety in the conversation. And just a major shout out to our facilitators who really both in facilitating the listening sessions, but also in all of our prep work would ask us questions about how we were going to recruit people or what the registration process was like or what the space was like, that helped us to create each listening session a little bit uniquely to really hold both the culturally responsive space and continue to be in trauma informed and empowerment based. In terms of empowerment, we really valued choice. Michael mentioned, we had multiple ways people could participate. So if a group listening session wasn't the right fit for somebody, there was written involvement that could be possible either through a survey or just email me, as well as one-on-one conversations. So we found that, it's a lot of work to host 28 listening sessions. And this is really a balancing act to make sure that we were stepping into those values and holding folks' safety, confidentiality, and time, like taking all of that really seriously. So we wanted to minimize barriers to participation as possible for trans community members and service providers to get involved and participate. At the same time, we want to make sure that there's a safe space that folks kind of know what they're going to step into, what that space is like, know the time commitment, and know what we're talking about. It maybe not everybody to be in a space that could talk about negative experiences with service providers. So we were constantly holding those things in mind, and some of the tools, for registration that are used in like research projects or things like that, we were created too many barriers for us to use. So that was our question throughout. In terms of outreach, we used a lot of social media and then also personal and professional networks to reach people. So we're aware that affects the scope of who we reach. Though I'll talk about demographics in a bit, and we did get to a lot of different people. So we posted on social media. We created a toolkit for partners to share, advisory team members, facilitators, other folks who were interested and excited and wanted to share it. We told folks, folks that we knew told folks, and that really helped get the word out of how to register. The process, just thinking about like, how do we screen? We created a SurveyMonkey, which was, a kind of registration form, and that contained a lot of the information we wanted people to know ahead of time. So, it's on Zoom. Do you have technology? Are you up for this type of conversation? What are you interested in? And also allowed us to collect demographics because it was really important that we wanted to get a sense of who is there so that we could assess for are there gaps in who we were able to reach, and then work to address that later on. This also helped because folks could sign up for both the service provider and the community member sessions this way. And our process, these arrows go down, like we would look at the SurveyMonkey and then sign people up for their first choice session. Some people, were screened out a couple times. People maybe signed up for the wrong session. It was clear from their comments. Sometimes a couple people said, I don't want to talk, I don't want to participate. So then, maybe they wouldn't go to a listening session, but they'd have other ways they could contribute if they wanted to. And we'd send follow-up to folks as best we could to help navigate, like, oh, that session already happened, do you want to go to another one, stuff like that. So that really allowed us to check that folks were wanting to and understood what was going on in the listening sessions, and help connect people with the sessions that they meant to sign up for. So those sessions, we had, like Michael said, originally planned not as close to 30 sessions, but in talking to folks, new groups came up that would be really important and meaningful. And so with the community sessions, it was important to us that these be open to trans and non-binary community, but we're not here to control anyone's identity or, make people prove that they have a certain identity. So we asked people to sign up for sessions that felt in alignment with them, knowing that, there may be a wide range of people in those sessions. So some of these were based on identities, such as non-binary, Black trans men, folks who have immigrated, elders. Some were focused more on experience, like a session for sex workers, or people who have done sex work in the past, survivors who are formerly incarcerated, and folks who are have experienced hate crime or are loved ones, community members of people who have been murdered. We had 16 community sessions in total. We had, like Michael said, interpretation at multiple sessions, and within our registration, we offered interpretation for any of those sessions. Those were just the ones folks asked for it with. And we also wanted to recognize throughout that people have multiple identities. So many people probably could have come to multiple sessions, and we often talked within community sessions about other identities as well. So people weren't limited just to the title of that session. In the neurodivergent and disabled session, people could also talk about being trans women or non-binary or experiences with sex work or anything like that, for example. We had 90 participants in the community sessions. In the provider sessions, we had 45 participants. And here, this was split up by kind of role that people had. And, as you can tell, there's fewer folks that attended the provider sessions. We had 12 sessions total. We did find that, some people screened themselves out from even attending a session thinking that they didn't have enough knowledge about providing services to trans folks in order to participate. And so that was, that was something that may have limited this. When we had conversations with people, we could help clarify. And we did find a lot of people came who wanted to learn more and then still had a lot to offer. There's a wide range of experience there. So here, just a couple of these groups: forensic nurses, LGBTQ community centers, shelter staff, which was open to any type of shelter, homeless, domestic violence, youth shelters, advocates, again, very broad category, healthcare providers, law enforcement, things like that. So I'm going to go now into our demographics, which is kind of a fun and also data intensive set of information. I just want to note that the demographics questions on the survey were optional. So not everybody answered them. So these numbers won't always add up to the same number of participants. And a couple people may have participated in more than one session. So that, and we counted them each time they participated. So in terms of age, we had the lighter blue is community members. So the highest group was 25 to 34-year-olds and community members, but added together, over half of our community participants were 35 and over. And I just want to highlight that as, sometimes in some communities, there's a belief that trans folks are only younger people. And so I'm glad we were able to hear more from the experiences of a wide range of folks, though we didn't hear from as many people in the 18 to 24 range or the 65 plus range. So that's a place that we'll be continuing to make sure we're listening to voices. Due to the nature of the listening sessions, we weren't explicitly looking for folks under the age of 18, but we'll make sure that we value and hear from community members in those age groups. And the provider ages were a bit more evenly distributed, with more folks in the 25 to 34 and the 45 to 54 range, and really kind of what we expect from service providers, knowing it's people's like role and job capacity. Race and ethnicity demographics, we did have this be a, check as many boxes as you want question, with also a multiracial and other choice, and used kind of the census language here. So with our community members, again, that's the lighter blue color. We had about 2/3 of participants overall were community members of color, and about 1/3 are white, with the largest group being Black or African American community members. We specifically had a session for Black trans women, a session for Black trans men, a session for trans women of color, and our session with immigrants and undocumented folks was not entirely folks of color, but ended up largely being that community. We also had a Native and Indigenous session. So we did outreach specifically for those communities. With the providers, we didn't specifically outreach around race and ethnicity. And so you can kind of see with the providers, that darker blue color, they were majority white. About 2/3 of providers were white. So that's another, gap that we're aware of and going to fill, and is a good reminder to everyone that you want to make sure that you're really specific about who you want to talk to, and doing intentional outreach in that way. We're also, I've circled in red here, we didn't have anyone who noted in demographics that they're Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. We didn't have any community members who said they were Asian or Asian American, and only a small number said they were Native or Indigenous. So there's still more work we want to do in that area. In terms of location, we asked if folks were rural, suburban, or urban. This was multiple choice, and it was noted to us in the Indigenous session that we didn't ask if folks were from reservations or tribal lands, tribal nations, and that was a gap. So for anyone who's doing data collection, we wanted to share that feedback so that we can do better in the future and everyone else can as well. Again, this is kind of, as we expected, a lot of urban, which is the purple, almost 3/4 of community members, about 2/3 of providers. And then suburban is the next biggest chunk, followed by rural. So always, more work to do to involve rural communities there. We also asked folks, what state or territory they were in. Again, this is a place where we could have included a wider range of options. It was good that we asked specifically about territories, not just states, but could have, again, named tribal lands in there. For community members, folks represented 27 different states, Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., as well as one or two people from Canada. And the darker blue color shows more people, and the lighter blue is fewer people, if the numbers aren't that visible. But the participants were largely from kind of the coasts and whatever you call that, Wisconsin, Michigan area. We can tell where there were some organizations that we tapped into who shared this with their community members. Georgia, California, Michigan, Wisconsin had a lot more people. So there's still a lot of places that folks are that we didn't get to reach out to, that we want to keep doing. Providers, a little bit similarly, still we're hearing from the coasts and the Northeast more. Our bigger chunks here are Florida and California, and whatever state that is. Y'all, my geography is bad. But again, this Ohio, great. I was pretty sure Ohio. Shout out to the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. I think they sent this out, and a few other connections there. So we got a lot of folks. So still some places that we want to make sure we hear from more people. We had 24 states, Washington, D.C., and again, a couple of people from Canada. We also asked folks, do you have a disability? And so we got a few prefer not to answers, which is always great. I love when people say, I don't want to tell you that, like it shows that you feel comfortable telling us no on things. The provider here is the pink color or the top line of each. So more providers said no than said yes. About double the number of providers said no, said yes, which likely speaks some both to our outreach efforts again, but also the hiring practices of service providers. And then community members, a slightly more people said yes than said no. I think 37 said yes, 32 said no, and 10 said prefer not to answer. And again, we did specifically have a listening session focused on disability. We also know that that trans and non-binary communities have higher rates of disability. So it was important to us that that we did reach out to folks and make sure that was included. And then gender. So we asked, what's your gender? And how to blink. And got 47 different answers after taking into account, spelling variations, spaces and things like that. There are, at least 3 different ways to spell non-binary. I did not include that necessarily in this 47. So they're all on the screen. A lot of people mentioned non-binary in their answer. So that was big. Trans man, trans woman, as well as a lot of other ways to express those identities. So what that looked like, again, on one side, we have gender of community participants. And we said, this is for trans and non-binary community members, but, we're not, it would be totally unethical to check, make people prove in any way. So the purpler color in the center circle is folks who explicitly said in their gender answer that they were trans. The greenish one is folks who said non-binary and didn't also say trans. And then there was a group of people who didn't say if they were trans or not. They might have been trans. I know from having been in the listening session, some of them were trans, but they, because they said in the listening session, but they didn't say in the demographics answer. So this blue section, I'm calling not specifying that they're trans, because I don't know if they're trans or not. From there, we could kind of guess that folks fit into kind of a female or woman category and a male or man category. This included female, femme, woman, things like that. A good chunk of folks said that they were trans and non-binary. So I ended up putting that in the purple trans section, but it could have been in the non-binary section. Again, when we make these decisions, it's really, unless we're listing all 47 answers, we're gonna simplify somebody's gender. So let me get you some other specifics. under trans, we had folks say that they were non-binary trans, trans man, man of trans experience, post-op trans woman, queer trans femme, trans guy. We had non-binary, AFAB, trans femme, non-binary guy as one gender. So there's so many genders that don't fit easily into these boxes. We also, the pink in the inner circle is two-spirit. So we had 2 people use that language in their answer. And then on the provider side, while we had a little over half of providers not specify if they were trans or not, again, we don't know if they may have been trans and just not said it. A lot of trans folks say, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm male, I'm female. So we had a few that said they were male. Most said they were female, woman, queer woman. And then of just under half, we had kind of an equal split between non-binary and trans. Though of providers, I think all the trans folks who ended up attending were trans male, man, masculine, and non-binary included. I made the decision to put not applicable under non-binary, which may or may not have been true to that person's experience, intergender, genderqueer, gender fluid, things like that. So we kind of lumped those in this umbrella. And yeah, I'm seeing in the chat the kind of appreciation for this. We had long discussions about how do we show this, and even this chart's not perfect. You know, we had to make decisions about what goes where, and there's overlap. And you know, a major theme was that trans and non-binary folks want other people to understand that our lives are complex and that our genders are complex and not put us into boxes. So we tried to kind of represent that here. All right, so those were the demographics we collected. I've already kind of named some of the gaps that we saw there. And that's why we wanted to collect demographics, so that we could be sure to see these. We've identified a couple next steps already. We're planning to do some work to specifically meet with culturally specific organizations that serve survivors. We're going to do some interviews and more work with trans individuals and organizations. And as Michael said, we also are going to do a lot of research and compile existing resources. So we want to hear from you. Are there other gaps that you see? And this is another chance to try Poll Everywhere and see if it works. We'll put that link in the chat in just a second. Once you text the Forge 2744 to the number 22333, you can just put your answer, just type in whatever gap you see and it'll show up on our slide in a second. If you don't want to do that, you can put your gaps in the chat box for us to see too. So are there other gaps that you noticed or that you're curious about or want to know if they might have existed? And please share them in the chat or in Poll Everywhere. All right, and we got one. Folks who have experienced homelessness, former foster youth. Excellent. And a question, did you collect information on how long people have been on their trans journey since their egg cracked, so to speak? We did not ask that question. So we didn't collect that. And I think some of that was a bit intentionally so that people wouldn't question themselves about if they were trans enough to participate. So we want people in our work to, know that they're included. And so didn't want to isolate folks, but that information could also be really useful, as we dig more into folks' experience, and recommendations people have for service providers. So I appreciate that question as something we can think about when we're framing the toolkit. Yeah, others, and this is going to save for us, so this is great. We'll use this in our framework later on. Service providers, run by or for transgender, non-binary folks. Yeah, we ended up having a lot of people come to community sessions that are trans folks running trans organizations. Excuse me. So that was really cool, but not something that got, captured in the demographics or the session titles, but we have from the transcripts, we can, peel out that a bit more. And we didn't specifically ask if people were questioning, so that's another great option. And then mainstream domestic violence and sexual assault orgs. We had folks who worked at those in some of our provider sessions, and we have some on our advisory team, but there's definitely room for talking to more of those. This is awesome. Thank you all. Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot of others in the chat too, so thank you. We're gonna suggest folks keep looking at the chat, and then we'll also take this information and use it to figure out our next steps. So feel free to keep answering this question. I'm going to move on and talk to you some about what we found from the community-based sessions. So first, another quote from one of the sessions from a community member. So over time, I found personal ways to incorporate it, music, writing out my anger and all that. So most of the ways I cope, it's just, personally, there's no NGO, there's nothing, and it's just me, trying to go by today. One of the first questions we asked in most of the community sessions was, where do you go to get support? It's really open-ended. And a lot of folks echoed a sentiment similar to this, that there are very few organizations, NGOs, nonprofits that they would go to. People really turned to themselves and to close friends, family, and community members for their primary supports. So our first big finding is just turning to each other. Again, a lot of people turned inwards. People mentioned the ways they were taking care of themselves through, like the previous person said, journaling, music, just learning coping mechanisms on their own, spirituality, touching the ground, connecting with the earth, and things like that. Others would go to, friends or family would have one or two people they talked to. We heard some really great stories of trans and non-binary folks taking care of each other. In one situation, a group of folks lived in a town where the service provider for gender affirming care was known to be really terrible and racist. And so they would all load into a car, as many as possible, and drive to the next town where there was a better service provider, and just have back-to-back appointments and all get seen. And it sucks that you have to do that, right? Everybody should get care where they live. And what a way to take care of each other, and say, we're going to all get this done. Let's go. So that was one really beautiful example of that. And we kept hearing again and again that having these spaces to talk to each other was really meaningful, and that particularly getting to talk at the intersection of a bunch of different things in people's lives was really special. One person in the Native and Indigenous session, you said that when they get go to groups or get to speak about their experiences, it's always as a trans person or as Native or as a survivor, and they rarely, if ever, get to talk about all three of those all at once. So, having more spaces where people can be fully themselves is something people yearn for, and people are finding ways to do that now. Another quote from these sessions, and I want to reiterate, this is how we make change. This is how we come together. This is how we assist each other. And no matter, what is going on, I think that we also need to remember that we are our way out, and that we, at the end of the day, always have each other. And it is my hope that we can continue to do things. We also heard a lot about folks not being valued. What we expected, people's pronouns and names and genders are not being respected in all aspects of people's identity. People are facing racism, ableism, all sorts of discrimination layered on top of each other. This first quote was, "It's not even considered a hate crime or bias crime because of the state that you're living in and the laws there." So when people were experiencing violence, they're finding not being valued by the system because the violence isn't even being recognized, at that state level. Other folks talked a lot about not being eligible for services, being denied services, not being able to get assistance from law enforcement. We particularly had folks talk about their experiences of being incarcerated. And one person said, "When I was in jail, nothing would happen to the other party, or both parties would get penalized. Both people are just guilty. We don't feel like anything will be done about it because you responded violently in turn. So outside, it's like there's no justice." And that was another common theme, that people were being judged and discriminated against for while they were incarcerated, experiencing increased violence and being devalued while incarcerated, after being incarcerated. And the same came up both in the session for sex workers and in other sessions. Also, people talked about experiences with sex work and this idea of being treated like a sex worker, which people know means being treated badly. So we heard widespread about folks' negative experience from folks there. And one person really powerfully noted, if the domestic violence service organization wasn't prepared to help me in that situation, truly, who is? And I know that stuck with me, having done lots of domestic violence work, that, that's who you think you're supposed to turn to. And it's such a huge dismissal if they say, no, we're not going to help. And still, trans and non-binary community members are finding ways to get help, right? We're taking care of each other, finding resources, sharing those resources with each other. These messages were also loud and clear. One person said, "So I advocate for myself. And if myself and a medical professional are not getting along, I get a new one because I don't want to go back and forth around circles." So that was kind of a theme. And from the outside, it might look like, oh, you just go to this person after this person after this person. But really, it's a great strategy to advocate for yourself and find the folks that will meet your needs and set the boundary that you're not going to be disrespected. So there was a lot of creativity like that. A lot of sharing information with each other about who's good, what to expect in different places, and kind of just doing what needs to get done. Other people, talked about they wouldn't disclose that they're trans to certain providers if that was going to be helpful, and things like that. Another example, specifically from the sex worker session, was, I know it for myself. As I was engaged in these survival practices, I didn't want to go through trans organizations. I didn't want people to know my tea and my business. So I would go to some random clinic way across whatever that nobody knows me. So that, like, while I may not be affirmed and whatnot, I'll still go there so that no one knows my business. So again, folks were kind of making this decision between, do I go to the trans affirming place or do I go to a place where I have privacy? Do I go to the place, that will do this or this? And there's this constant kind of balancing process people are trying to figure out. Another big theme from the community sessions was this ripple effect. So what happens to someone at one service provider, one professional, has an effect that ripples throughout our lives and the lives of our communities. Healthcare, not just for, because it's really important, but healthcare focused on trans affirming and gender affirming care was a major theme in our sessions. And so many folks shared that they had faced such obnoxious treatment, so many barriers getting that healthcare that I was just like, why am I going to go looking for other types of support and services? Like, it was this feeling of just, I'm kind of done with that. So that had a ripple effect out. One person shared, the medical profession have really treated me like I was kind of slow, didn't know what I was doing. So in this quote, I hear the ableism and discrimination against people that the medical profession has, as well as the dismissal of a trans person and saying, we don't think you know what you're talking about. Other folks also shared really having to vet therapists and providers for multiple things. So being trans, being a survivor, having been incarcerated, and that, the more providers were upfront about what they would and wouldn't do, and what their values were, was really helpful in that process. But a lot of therapists were telling this person, like, oh no, I'm not equipped to support you because it's too complicated, or because of the incarceration history, things like that. So that experience changes how you seek help later on. Another person shared, and I've been straight up told in the emergency room that I should just up and move to New York City because no one's going to take me seriously here. That's just, stop being dismissive. If you're here, you took off to help the people. So help the people. I'm a person, help me. And if that's not, a loud and clear call to what we want service providers to be doing, and I don't know what is. And so many people said that, I go into an emergency room and they're like, you're trans, this is too complicated. And it's like, help me, that's your job. We also saw the ripple effect happening in the violence that people experienced and how that impacted their lives. And particularly, the rise in anti-trans legislation, hate messages, and hate violence in the past few years. So one person shared, I'm more hyper vigilant now. I'm scared more now of being visible in public because of all the rhetoric, all the anti-trans propaganda, all the everything, because it just feels more dangerous now. Legitimately just feels more dangerous just existing out in public. So all of this stuff that's happening in the world is impacting the full lives of trans and non-binary survivors. We also asked folks, what do you want service providers to know? What are the things they do well? What should they be doing? Kind of stuff. And a lot of the answers really focused on respect and agency or choice. So you believe people about their experience and about their gender. And this came across in a lot of ways, it was like, believe me about my pronouns, my name, my gender, but also believe me about the violence I've experienced. Believe me about my culture, my race, my access needs. Just believe me. Use the right names and pronouns, starting place. And that's really an indicator for a lot of people of how much they can trust a place. Address the issue you're asked to address. Again, people had stories all over of going in to a provider for one thing, and that provider really focusing on something else, often related to their curiosity or their lack of knowledge about transness. That wasn't what the person wanted to be focusing on. And meet folks' access needs and plan ahead for that. Again, the needs for interpretation services are super important. And there we really spoke a lot about, or heard a lot about from people, the need for culturally responsive and knowledgeable interpreters, language around gender, transness, queer identities, all of that stuff. Not all interpreters know. We were primarily hearing this from folks talking about ASL and Spanish interpretation, but we know that's true for all interpreters. One person shared, often we get a different interpreter every time. Every time I have a medical interpreter, an appointment related to my body, I try and get 5 minutes for the appointment to explain that I'm trans, etc. And so you're really trying to download all that in 5 minutes. And I have to repeat myself every time. I have to out myself before an appointment, and it's frankly a pain in the ass. And it's a problem that many hearing people do not have to face. So again, for providers, meeting people's access needs really, really is essential, and doing that well and listening to them about what those are. Okay, so that was fast. And obviously we had 16 sessions. This is a tiny snippet of what we heard. We have another poll for y'all, or chat question, which is, what are you curious about? And I will say this question really is going to be super helpful to us. So I'm curious about what you're curious about, because it's going to help us think about, what do we need to keep reviewing the listening sessions for? What do we need to research further? What do we need to put in the toolkit? So you can use poll everywhere or the chat. What are you curious about? And as you do that, I just want to encourage everybody, we're like halfway through, we're more than halfway through. Take a breath or a stretch. This is a lot of information. Michael, your slide is next if you want to hop on screen while people are stretching. Or doing this with your shoulders, wiggling them.
I'm modeling. Emil's usually the model for stretching, but we encourage everybody to stretch if your body wants to.
Just a couple. I love these. In the chat, how do we inspire service providers to want to learn about trans survivors? Great. What opportunities do you see for bridging older and younger trans folks out of this research? So, and I have to say, I'm not going to answer these questions right now, except the top one, how a prevention educator who's trans in a rural area can address the issue of gender when you're not even talking about what we're talking about. I used to do so much prevention work, like email me, let's chat about it, whoever said that. But the rest of these we will save and we'll keep processing, and we'll do more kind of report backs out to y'all to get those answers. So keep sharing. Thank you for helping us with this project by asking them. All right, your slides, Michael.
Cool. Thank you. So Emil talked about those community sessions, and I'm going to share with you a little bit about the provider sessions. So out of those 28 sessions, 12 of them, if I do the math right, were provider sessions. And I'm going to see, Emil, if my clicker actually works, and maybe it did. So one of the first findings that we found was kind of this duality around the tools that people had, the tools and skills that providers had, would make services better for trans folks if those providers use those tools. So a lot of times providers just kind of forget what they know about doing victim service work or healthcare work or mental health care work, because when they see somebody trans, their mind just keeps on going to that transness and they forget what they need to do as a provider for somebody seeking the services that they're seeking. And at the same time, so that's part of what's held. And on the other side of what's held is that a lot of providers feel the need for and do have a need for more trauma-informed care or person-centered care. So again, those things are both true at the same time. We're finding that people just, the training goes out the window. So people may have been trained in how to work with trans folks. It's not rocket science. I mean, those of us here know that. But a lot of times, again, when people work with trans folks, they forget their basic politeness. They forget how to do the work that they know how to do. So we need to provide training that sinks in, that stays in folks, so they can always remember to treat folks well and appropriately. And we also need to remember that not everybody is getting trauma-informed care. So they might be really good at what they do, but they may not know enough about trauma to really work with survivors. So again, both of those things are training needs, as well as places where we can help providers do a little bit better. And Emil, I'm going to have you forward again since I've got a lot of lag. So one of the things that was really profound for me in all of these sessions, and Emil and I were in, I think, every one of the sessions, maybe but one of them for each of us, was that the providers kept on talking about capacity. And we know that most victim service providers and most healthcare providers and most, everybody that provides services, almost everybody seems to be stretched really thin and really, to their capacity. And this is, especially true in smaller communities and rural communities with agencies that do multiple different things. If they serve more than just sexual assault, but if they serve domestic violence and stalking and other family-related crimes, we know that people are just really stretched thin. And when providers are stretched thin, it means that survivors don't get the care that they should receive. And so, some of this is a systemic problem of how can agencies have enough staff so that people can receive the amount of time, the level of care, the level of compassion that provider really wants to give that client as they come in. So again, systemic problem, but people are stretched thin. People are doing the best that they can, but there's just not the capacity. And that relates to the second point on the slide, which is, the exhaustion that so many trans and non-binary providers are feeling, that they're the ones that are doing all the educating, that they're the ones that are being asked to be the person to be on call or the person to see the trans client that's coming in. So, a lot of folks that are in that dual role of having a trans identity or a trans experience and who are also providers are having to wear all of these different hats, which again is going to impact the services that clients receive. And the quote on the next slide is going to illustrate a little bit of what some providers have said. This is from one of the advocate sessions. And the quote says, "Something I've seen, particularly at mainstream organizations, is when they want to funnel every survivor to somebody who shares that same identity of whose staff, instead of having an expectation that everyone on their staff and their volunteers can all be ready and all be responsive." And I think that's just a joke. It is horrible in relation to being trauma informed, because what's a great way to compound people's vicarious trauma? To have them be overloaded with people who share their identities, who talk about the kind of violence and abuse that they have also experienced, right? So again, that's just, that's a provider who's also has lived experience of those traumas, and they're always getting all of those trans and queer clients. So how do we spread that load? How do we make sure that everybody is as well informed as they can be so that they can see any client that walks through the door? When we look at the next finding that we looked at for providers, it's around the culture of agencies, the culture of communities. And, a lot of us on this call are in the know already. So we know that things like visible affirmations matter. So we heard that from a lot of the provider sessions that, having name and pronouns on people's name badges is really important, or having buttons, or having art, or having literature, or having anything that says, we get you. We know that trans people exist. We serve you. We welcome you here. We want you to be here. So having those visible signs is really critically important at agencies, especially if they have brick and mortar kind of facilities. But even if people are on the street like law enforcement, or doing other things where they're not in a hard and fast office. A lot of providers talked about how culture needs to change. And there needs to be this shift from, geez, we have to learn more about this other population. Like, we have to learn more about trans people, and it being a burden. And we have to shift from that to trans people are an integral part of our community as a workplace, our community as a geographic community, our community as the world's community. So some of how this plays out, like, some people said not those words exactly of like, oh, trans people need to be an integral part, but it came out in ways like people noticing that law enforcement policies only talked about when trans people were offenders or perpetrators or being arrested. So like, oh, we have a law enforcement policy about trans people, but it's about what to do after we've already arrested them and which cell to put them in. It doesn't help law enforcement officers deal with the victims, the survivors that they're coming to the scene to help. So that's another place of like, how do we have people be integral in as part of the community? Trans people are not just perpetrators. The majority of trans people are not perpetrators. So how do we help law enforcement recognize the fullness of trans people and the needs that trans people have? Another way of looking at this is looking at trans-specific trainings is oftentimes extra or optional within agencies. And so what would happen if those trans-specific trainings were mandatory? We have a lot of agencies that require mandatory trainings about lots and lots of different things. What if we made trans-specific training something that we asked of all people and we expected of all people? Another thing that we heard, and this is where some of these dual roles happened, where people were trans or non-binary and were service providers. What we heard a lot from folks was that they weren't shown respect as workers. And so the kind of logical thing that people were thinking is like, well, if I'm not shown respect and I'm an employee and these are my coworkers, how are they going to treat our clients? How are they going to treat the survivors that walk in the door? So that's how some of that played out in terms of changing culture. The last thing on the slide is about really valuing the input of trans and non-binary people and compensating them meaningfully. And this goes to a lot of different things. I mean, I think that we oftentimes hear that, well, we want to have a panel of people who have experienced X, Y, or Z. So we reach out to our communities and ask people to be on panels. Well, that can feel really tokenizing to people. And is the only time that we're reaching out to them is when we want something from them? Do we only want them to talk about their transness? Emil talked about that, where people couldn't talk about their transness, their nativeness, their survivorship. We want to put people into this one box. So how are we engaging with trans folks? And are we compensating them, not just financially, but emotionally and relationally? Move on to the next slide. So provider findings around policy and practice. So many of us know that, we have to have policies because our funder says we have to have these policies, or, we believe that creating policies means that we're doing the right thing. And a lot of us, when we really look at our agencies and our policies, we recognize that we might not be walking the walk. We're only talking the talk. So how this translates to the work, what we saw in these sessions were, first of all, that a lot of trans people were not going to mainstream providers. They're like, not going there. I mean, Emil talked about that in several different ways of like, I'm going to go look at my friends. I'm going to sit by myself. I am not going to that mainstream service provider. So sometimes people, if they do reach out, they're going to go to a trans organization or a queer organization, which is great in theory. But a lot of those organizations are small. They're not funded. They don't have people that have the knowledge around trauma or how to help somebody who's experienced something traumatic. So that's a really big challenge. That's not so much about policy and practice, but it's like, if trans folks that are experiencing harm are going to trans organizations, how can we, victim service providers, training agencies, help those trans organizations become more trauma informed, know how to help the survivors that are coming to them, and do that work that ideally should be happening at mainstream organizations, but isn't because of some of those barriers. We know that many agencies state that they are serving everyone. And that's a nice catchphrase. Oh, we serve everyone, or we treat everyone equally. But we know that in practice, that doesn't happen. So, we see it a lot in shelters, in sex segregated spaces. A lot of times people know that they should serve people equally, but they don't. So, a common example is, oh, we'll give somebody a hotel voucher, whereas we put the rest of the folks that are not trans or not male, we will put them into a communal shelter. So how do those policies and practices make sure that people really are serving everyone who walks in their door? We heard from many providers that, their agency might have a non-discrimination statement. Some people knew that their agencies did, but the statement isn't enough. How does that go into practice? Does that agency offer health care for their trans employees? For example, their non-discrimination policy may not extend to offering equal compensation to their trans employees or to the clients that they serve. And the last piece around this kind of piece around policy and practice comes when we look at things like language that includes family. So a lot of times we look at, DV as something that happens in a family situation, or who are you married to, or so it could be the forms that people use, and it could be the written policies of who's included in the services that are offered. So on the next slide, there's a really great quote, and this actually came from one of the community sessions, but it's a really interesting quote that reminds us that what family means to one set of people is not necessarily what family means to another set of people. So this quote says, "I've tried to put out PPOs, or just personal protection orders, on certain clients that I knew were going to become a bit of an issue. I had issues with that because they basically tried to say, well, if you weren't actually in a relationship, then you kind of can't get something in place to protect you from a stranger." Pretty much is how they looked at it. So unless you were in a DV situation or it's family related, it's kind of hard to obtain a PPO on clients or whatnot. So this person was really saying, like, some relationships are valid, some are not. Some workplaces, I believe this was from the sex workers work listening session, some people can't get a protective order against one of their clients that they're working with, even though they deserve that respect. But the language of the laws or the language of the policies of the people that they're working with to try to get those protective orders don't understand or honor or recognize the reality of the complexity of relationships that people have. So this was the shorter version of the provider section, and we're running out of time, and I want to make sure that we get another little question for folks, which is really a big question. So what do you think your colleagues need to know? Sometimes we can more easily see what our colleagues need to know than what we need to know. So if you were thinking about your colleagues who may not always know what they need to know about trans people or trans survivors, what do you think they should know? And again, we're going to use poll everywhere for this. And hopefully that will work. And if not, please feel free to use the chat. And I see that we're either really delayed or people are tired because it's almost an hour and a half. Thank you. So encouragement and creativity. Trans people have always existed at any age. Yep. I want to keep us moving just for the sake of time. Thank you for like entering that. We definitely would like to hear more about where you think some of those gaps are. Emil, do you want to jump back on and read this last quote, and then we'll open up for a few minutes of Q&A?
Yeah. My role is that, kind of tokenized position within a mainstream organization. So the work does feel pretty isolating at times. So this moment of connection and just hearing some similar experiences has been really important and energizing, especially on a Monday. So thank you so much.
I just wanted to make a comment on this quote. One of the things that we heard in almost every listening session was how much people got out of the sessions. We were hosting listening sessions to get information from folks. And this quote reminds me of how many people said, wow, I really felt connected to the people that were in this 90-minute session with me. I felt less alone. I felt supported. I got something out of this. So really, really positive that it was a two-way street with that, that data communication. So we only have a couple of minutes, and I know, Emil, you'd like to share a few more slides, and I'm wondering if we can have folks pose some questions. We've got a survey, an evaluation survey. And for the sake of time, I'm wondering if folks can pop their questions either in chat right now or in the evaluation survey. And we promise to either get back to you or for sure take your comments and questions in mind as we move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. So our next steps, we want to continue to be transparent about the work that we're doing and be accountable to our communities and to trans and non-binary survivors of all sorts of violence. So throughout the next 2-year process, we'll continue to have public report backs of our process, of what we're learning, of what we're developing. We'll keep engaging with community, which includes trans folks and service providers. We'll be doing research, looking at, what's already existed and out there and the amazing work people are already doing, and developing materials and sharing those as they come together. Please connect with us. You can do that through our social media, which we'll put all the links in the chat: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. This recording will be available, our website, and we have a blog, Trans Survivors, where you can find a lot of great resources. And you can reach out to myself or Michael or both of us about anything, follow-up questions, concerns, thoughts on this, being involved in the future, any of that stuff. And just finally, thank you all so much for being here. Your participation has really helped us, give us things to think about in our next steps. And for all of you who, shared your thoughts or participated in listening sessions, thank you again so much. It means a lot to us and we're really grateful. If you haven't left yet, Caleb just dropped the evaluation link in the chat. Please fill it out. It's a chance to tell us how we're doing. We'll also email it out to folks. And thank you so much. Yeah, so plans to disseminate the findings. I can say, this will be publicly available, what we've just shared as a recorded webinar. We'll also be continuing to have stuff like this. And then the final toolkit will be virtually hosted, and we'll develop, at some point, a plan for doing a lot of outreach so that people can find it and get to it. So that's the short answer to dissemination right now. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.